Again, thank you everyone for joining. We'll probably have some folks trickling in during the presentation, but we should go ahead and get started. So Brian, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Susan. And hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. My name is Brian Sandford. I'm a designer in the Boston office of Mass Design Group. I'll get into it a little bit more about who we are. First, let me share my screen here. Can everybody see that okay? Great. So, yeah, like I said in the event invite, I'm here to talk about the Northeast Bio-Based Materials Summit, which is a gathering we held in our office last November. Thought we could talk about kind of why we had it, where we stand right now, what happened during the day, and sort of where we've gone in the almost a year since then. So I'll get into it. First, just a little bit about me. I live in Boston with my wife Claire here and our dog. Originally from Central Jersey, so maybe a little bit closer to you, some of you folks. But I've been in Boston about 10 years now after going to school at Wentworth Institute here in town. And I've worked at Mass Design Group for almost 3 years, almost exactly, just the other day. For anyone who doesn't know about us, Mass is a global nonprofit architecture firm. We were founded about 15 years ago to do work in East Africa at the behest of the late Dr. Paul Farmer and in conjunction with Partners in Health, working specifically in Rwanda, northern Rwanda, helping to design and build kind of rural district hospital. And since then, we've really grown. We're right now about 130, 140 folks across 4 offices. We have a big office in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. I'm in Boston, which is kind of our HQ. And we have smaller offices in Poughkeepsie, New York, and out in Santa Fe in current New Mexico. And what I really like about Mass is that I think each office has a really multidisciplinary team. We're not just architects. We have a big, really a great landscape team. We have engineers, writers, researchers. We have an amazing film team, advocacy, philanthropy. We have folks that cover so many different disciplines, which is really great. And because Mass is a nonprofit, we can really position ourselves to kind of serve our partners throughout the lifespan of a project. So we like to get involved really, really early on. If say a nonprofit partner might even be starting to think about a project, we can help them evaluate whether that's a good fit or not, all the way through, long after a project's been completed with post-occupancy evaluations, survey, research work, things like that. Being a nonprofit also allows us to do some research and policy development, like we're going to talk about today. And just lastly, a little bit more about our Boston office. Like I said, we have folks from all over. We have a team specializing in public memory and memorial, advocacy, operations, all those things. But the biggest group here in Boston is definitely our architecture team, which is really focused on affordable housing. And that's what I work on. So it sounds like I'm amongst friends here, which is great. We work on affordable housing really mostly around Boston, in and around Boston, but kind of across the Northeast as well. The top left here is a project we just opened in about 6 or 8 months ago. 140, around 140 affordable apartments for seniors. It's part of the larger Brighton campus of Two Life Communities, which is a really amazing organization providing housing for seniors. And the other kind of renderings on the side here are a variety of projects we have around the region in various stages of development. So, like I said, we're really focused on affordable housing, but we have some other initiatives as well, like we're going to talk about, and of course, that work overlaps. So, the bio-based stuff. Really, I guess it's good to, in the words of Lewis Carroll, we can begin at the beginning. And it really started for us with one of these. So this is a prefabricated straw panel built by our very good friends at New Frameworks. They're a group up in Burlington, Vermont. It's a wall panel, it's a prefabricated wall panel, and it's a really amazing product. So it's made with, straw from locally grown grain. It's put together by folks working in a cooperatively owned and operated company. It sequesters much more carbon than it emits, which is great, of course. It's got a really high R value, because it's so thick and insulates really well, and it can be finished with natural materials. And much like CLT, of course, it sort of chars instead of burns. So um, it's overall a fantastic product. And so a little while ago, we had a project on the boards where we thought, hey, why don't we try to use one of these in the project? And despite our best efforts, we could not get it to work. We just kept running into roadblocks, including code requirements, very skeptical clients, contractors who had no idea what we were talking about, never seen this crazy thing before, and it really didn't work. We couldn't build a project with it, and uh, of course that really is because it really goes against the kind of status quo of contemporary construction. The vast majority of our built environment as it exists today relies on extractive materials. Concrete and cement alone create up to 9% of the world's carbon emissions every year. Um, of course, there's innovations like CLT, which is amazing and worth learning from and celebrating. But especially in structure, extractive materials kind of reign supreme. And that's true with insulations as well. We insulate our buildings with foams and plastics derived from petroleum, and they have huge upfront emissions. Their production, kind of pollutes environments and spreads harm throughout the supply chain. They don't do well in fires, and they off gas, kind of nasty chemicals. Of course, companies are working to improve those things, but on a whole, they're kind of based on an extractive system. And even finishes. This is just a generic LVT picture, but I'm sure it's a material we're all familiar with. But even that, vinyl is not exactly the friendliest of things, and as I say, is kind of deeply extractive and sort of and harmful on a very large scale. So that's what the current contemporary building construction industry is based around, materials like these. And what we're interested in is kind of breaking from that. So we kind of quickly realized we needed to zoom out from just a single project and look at this much more deeply and more widely. So I went back and actually found the kind of email. This is only from about a year and a half ago, where this sort of kicked off a series of conversations between Mass and New Frameworks, the kind of straw panel manufacturers I mentioned. And this kind of, through those, we sort of quickly realized that we needed a lot more voices from a lot different backgrounds, but we had a kind of opportunity to sort of bring them all together and focus around trying to answer kind of a single, I think actually fairly simple question. And this is really the crux of the work and what we're trying to do. How can regionally produced bio-based to market at scale across the northeast of North America? And I think this thing has kind of three key parts, so we can sort of get into what they are. The first one is to focus on regional production. Of course, we're interested in learning from other localities, other places, around what they've done and what they've had success with, of course. But in the end, we really want to know like what works best in our corner of the planet. We want kind of systems that can embrace vernacular knowledge and solutions. We want the kind of economic benefits of producing those materials to stay here with the people who grow and produce and install them. And just on a kind of higher level, we're interested in sort of place-based design thinking that really considers where we are and when we are and all those things. The next kind of key part is bio-based. These materials that come from bio-based and regenerative sources minimize upfront carbon emissions and maximize the potential for carbon sequestration. And they can also be quite a bit healthier, which is beneficial from the minute the seed is planted in the ground all the way through 50 years from now, and it's still in a building. And of course, scale. So I think right now a lot of the materials that kind of fit those first two parameters are sort of confined to single family homes. I think they have a reputation of kind of being, cottage for hippies in the woods, which is great. It's no shade there, but I think we're interested in using them at scale. We want to use them across the construction industry, buildings large and small, buildings of different typologies, not just single family homes, just because of the potential for impact. It's so much higher. And so that was the kind of question we coalesced around. Again, understanding we did not have the solutions, but we knew a lot of cool people who we were sure had good thoughts about them. And so we just started sending out a flurry of emails. We really wanted to bring in folks from across the material supply chain. I know it sounds like we have a lot of folks in the kind of design and then the sort of ownership and development world, which is amazing. Those are two key groups, but we wanted to expand even earlier back to kind of raw material growth and supply, from there to kind of material manufacturing and fabrication, design. We wanted folks who had really hands-on experience in construction and installation, and then, like I said, through ownership and sort of maintenance. So, farmers, fabricators, carpenters, superintendents, developers. We really felt like we needed such a wide base of knowledge because the problem is so large. And so we need a lot of perspectives to really even begin to understand it. So yeah, like I said, we sent out a bunch of emails. Those people we reached out to more, and we got a really strong response. This kind of looping low res GIF is just a part of some of the responses we received. So once we kind of had this list, we just sort of picked a date and told everyone to come on by. And so onto the summit, which we held here at MASS's Boston office. We have this kind of lovely gallery space for this exact reason, exhibitions, gatherings, things like this, which is really awesome. We started with a kind of a small introduction. We really wanted the day to be focused on discussions and generating solutions, not just sort of sitting and listening. I've gone to a lot of summits that are like that have amazing presentations, and those are great. But we sort of saw there was a gap to fill on actually bringing people together to really talk and work together in a place. So, but we did start with two kind of short and inspirational presentations, a small talk from the organizers, and then two great introductions from David Lewis of LTL Architects and John Sarah Ruth from the Health and Materials Lab at Parsons, which really kind of, I think, put everyone in the right state of mind. We also broke some bread together, brought down from Vermont by New Framework's very own Ace McCarlton, who's awesome. He brought these cheeses and breads, and I would recommend if you can start more meetings by eating some bread and cheese, that it's a good way to kind of kick things off. So from there, the morning, we broke into groups to talk about challenges. We thought it was really important to bring to group folks based on their expertise within that kind of supply chain that I mentioned, and have them really just generate a clear view of all of the challenges we currently have standing in the way of this kind of larger adoption. So like I said, everyone broke into groups anywhere from kind of 12, 16, maybe 18 people at the largest. And it generated just a ton of Post-its and sort of scribbled thoughts. Very freewheeling conversations, as you might guess. But once this was all kind of on the wall, we asked the groups to really kind of pick two of the more pressing challenges and dig into their root causes. So, if we wanted to kind of tackle the problem, we wanted to really understand it deeply first. And I won't go through what every group generated. You can find the proceedings from the day on the MASS website, which I'll link to at the very end here, if you're interested in reading more. But just a little sample of kind of what the manufacturing and distribution group put together. They identified kind of at a high level two groups of challenges, one around supply chain. So, there's the technology is developed fairly slowly, which really stretches lead times and keeps access kind of low. There's not a lot of investment into these materials, especially because the regulatory barriers can be really quite high. And because of some of those barriers, the market itself is actually kind of small, and this restricts not just the development of the technology, but also its distribution. And there's no kind of subsidies to support the growth of this manufacturing in this market. So along with that, they also really focused in on the kind of demand and sort of marketing, sort of perception challenges that, at the first level, there's not a lot of consumer awareness about these products, about what they are, why they're valuable, why they should be considered, and so that keeps demand low. When folks do know about them, there's often a lot of misconceptions around their applications, around safety, around durability, reliability. Cost is a huge one that can kind of lead people to sort of unfairly brush them aside. But the industry also hasn't done a great job of making the kind of metrics and the goals that using these products can achieve. They haven't done a great job of making those things clear. So the sort of value add of pursuing these is less obvious. So that's just a sample from the morning. Like I said, the other four groups undertook similar exercises and then kind of all shared back. And so from there, we had lunch, and then in the afternoon broke into groups to talk about solutions. But this time we sort of shuffled the groups up. So there was folks from across the spectrum of material supply in each group. That way we could kind of take a cross-disciplinary approach to problem solving. People could bring in fresh ideas. Those who had been in it longer could kind of bring their expertise. But we thought it was a good way to kind of take a fresh look at things. And yet again generated this huge group of notes, post-its, writings, things like that. And so again, I just wanted to jump into kind of one of the representative groups. This was from the kind of ownership group. They, in the morning, they had really identified the fear of change as a kind of big, broad challenge. There's a sort of status quo. Why would we break from it? And so they thought about solutions, including kind of public awareness, establishing a sort of regional knowledge sharing network, much like it sounds like you folks do with this call regularly, and to sort of develop a list of precedents about what's out there now to kind of demystify what's been done, and also potentially support pilot projects and case studies to generate the next set of precedents to then share out. If something has been done by someone else before, they really thought it would go a long way to kind of easing concerns around this fear of change. And then, of course, they also cost was identified in the morning as a big challenge, and so they talked through the idea of potentially linking bio-based materials to existing corporate kind of commitments and sustainability goals that might make those upfront costs more worth it. That they could all kind of start with some of the low-hanging fruit and some of the simple materials substitutions to really, just get something done for now as these longer-term solutions get worked out. They could lobby local and state governments, sounds like we have some here today, for incentives to support this. And of course, to take a kind of whole life approach to cost beyond just the pure upfront dollar costs that some of these materials that currently get used over time, when compared to bio-based materials, are actually quite costly. So again, that's just a sort of sample of what was discussed. And so from there, we came back together once more and just identified a few big themes, which I thought we could introduce. And I'm not going to read all this, but there was a lot of talk around kind of misunderstanding and communications, awareness, perception, things like that for these materials. Related to that are some of the structural barriers and kind of regulatory barriers, existing codes, policy. They really favor these extractive, petrochemical, or mineral industries. And then the bottom two are sort of related, of course. The supply chain needs to be continued, needs to be supported and grown responsibly to kind of keep this market doing well. And that the industry as a whole just needs to kind of grow, but has a potential to do that really through shared development and marketing, that this isn't something that any of these manufacturers or stakeholders can take on alone, that they, much like the supply chain, that sort of collaboration is the key here. And so kind of that was the day, which was really fun and great. And then it's the kind of question of, where do we go from here? And so since the summit, we've had kind of regular virtual meetings, including the biggest one earlier this summer, which was attended by a little over 100 people virtually, which was kind of really amazing. And through those conversations and the kind of work of the convening group, we've established the Bio-Based Materials Collective. We have a kind of small steering committee that just sort of tries to keep everything on track, plan events, things like that. I'm a member. But really the work of the group is done in these 5 working groups, which were spawned directly from what we heard at the summit and the sort of themes that were synthesized. So just to give you a little preview, the kind of communications group is really focused on addressing those misunderstandings we talked about and kind of spreading out educational materials, case studies, just information that can really kind of counteract and counteract those misconceptions. The education working group is focused on finding those kind of existing materials as well as generating new ones. Again, because the group has so many amazing connections to different stakeholders, manufacturers, building owners, building designers, that we think there's a real opportunity to kind of generate new content that can be shared around. The regulation group is kind of exactly what it says on the tin. It's all focused about policy and development, both understanding our kind of current landscape, that's what we're sort of engaged in now, as well as starting to get a seat at the table for developing future codes and being involved in that process. The innovation group is really focused on exploring ways to work together. So far, everything's been volunteer, and sort of legal structures that could allow us to guide us on a path from kind of a list of emails and Zoom invites to, a real proper professional organization with members and structures and all those things. And lastly, kind of collaboration is focused on our kind of collective vision and just coordinating between those groups. You can imagine there's lots and lots of overlap. They are not silos by any means. So each of those groups have a good membership base. They meet virtually once a month. And then they have 2 kind of co-chairs who organize everything and report back. And yeah, kind of keep the collaboration flowing. And all this work is really sort of centered around this collective vision for the future that really came out of the summit. So, beyond just materials, of course, the materials are just a sort of a means and methods towards larger change to work in our built environment. We really want buildings and the building industry as a whole to be really good for people, and spread abundance. I think it's really possible to spread, economic, social, and environmental welfare across the whole industry through material supply chains that are resilient, in a changing world, and the folks in that industry can be kind of educated and empowered to use these things. Um, we think that the built environment can be good for the land. Of course, all these materials come from the land in one way or another, and that the kind of cultural side of it can be protected and respected, and better connected to the supply chain. That there can be really strong relationships, across the life cycle of materials. It's no longer just sort of living in a sort of industrialized, kind of divorced from nature a box, but something that really is related to where it's come from. And that the relationships between all the players can be kind of mutually beneficial. And all this relates, kind of comes together under the idea that it can be good for all, and sort of well connected, that all these materials have sort of demonstrated biogenic carbon storage, and I would emphasize demonstrated there. And similarly, that they're really healthy for not just for humans, but for the kind of wider ecological system, and that the practices that produce them are productive not just now, but for the future, by improving soil, water, and ecosystem health. So that's our kind of vision, and I would invite you to join us. Like I said, if you click that first link there, it'll take you to the Mass website to where you can find more information on the summit. There's a long proceedings document that shows everything we talked about, shows everyone who was there, either in person or at our kind of follow-up virtual meeting. There's lots of good stuff there, and if you'd like to join the group, and one of those working groups is jumping out to you, I'd invite you to kind of email my colleague James here, to get on the mailing list and join our next meeting. So that's all I got. I'm happy to answer any questions and talk this through.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brian. That was really informative. So appreciative that you shared all of this with us today. So I have to confess, I did a little research ahead of this presentation, because I was asked to pinch hit for Dean Evans, who normally runs these conversations. So, to try to get a little more educated about the biomass and what it really means and what it really is. I just want to share. Let's see. Brian, if you wouldn't mind ending your share. Let's see if it'll let me. Yeah, here we go. Just quickly, if you're curious, what are some of the actual materials? Yeah, here are some. Some of these you look and like, yeah, the hippie the hippie image comes to mind. But in affordable housing and multifamily affordable housing, there's at least two here that we use all the time: wood frame and brick. Some of the rest of and maybe we don't really do cork flooring, but we could, for example. Some of the rest of these are a little further out there, but I know one architect in our group has recently completed a mass timber project, so there's some familiarity with that. So just so you know, and then the other thing I found, which is interesting, this is from that same book. In a standard house, materials that are problematic: carpet, spray foam insulation, vinyl tiles, asphalt shingles, concrete, drywall. Those materials seem very familiar. So, I was a little panicked when I read that, like, oh my gosh, we're using all the wrong materials. So with that, I'm going to open it up. And Kathleen?
I would just say, Susan, I really appreciate those. David, I love that book. It's sitting on my desk, not 20 feet from me. David Lewis from LTL gave a talk at the beginning of the summit, and so it's really wonderful. I think it's a great introduction to a wide variety of materials, and it gives a great intro for each one about the processes that lead into them and how they're made and how they're grown and processed and everything. So yeah, it's a great read.
Kathy, you've got your hand raised. Kathy Dorgan.
Yeah,
I believe if you unmute, you should be able to speak.
I think I'm here. First of all, this was an incredible presentation. I am so inspired and so excited about what you're doing and what a resource this is for all of us in this work. Many of the people on this call are trying so hard to do this on our own, and I was this morning with the congressman at our project, and we were able to use Gutex insulation and marmoleum and wood flooring, but we're so far to go, and this seems like such an incredible resource. Can you help us think through a little bit, how do we work in our local environment to share this with more people and to incentivize um, looking at some of the embodied carbon issues? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Thanks for the kind words. That's really I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's a great question. I think, and it's something, it's something we struggle with a lot. Like I said, we do a lot of affordable housing, and there's lots of times we're putting drywall on all our projects. We're putting mineral wool. There's times Fias, makes us use spray foam and all these things. So I don't want to pretend that that we've solved these issues and that we've gotten we figure something out that nobody else has. Like I think we're just trying to work together to slowly push towards the future. I would say that a few things. I think one is a great start. What you've described is that kind of low hanging fruit, right? You don't have to use LVT. You can use vinyl free flooring or linoleum flooring, right, or wood flooring. That's a great start. You don't have to use high VOC carpets. You can use recycled or wool or things like that, more natural finishes. Beyond that, I feel like it's something our office has struggled a lot with. We found that the best opportunities for embodied carbon thinking, which also, of course, often correlates to this bio-based thinking, is at the very beginning of projects, or in moments when there's um, big cost pressures. So I'm working on a project for 150 units of senior affordable housing up in Lynn, and we had a big budget crunch where we were, I think, $8 or $9 million over budget. And the way we got out of it was by really, really reducing the underground concrete, which was just parking. It saved a huge amount of upfront carbon. I think something like 90% of the project's upfront carbon was in this, underground parking garage, basically, and also saved a ton of money. And I think that was an opportunity where carbon and cost really came together, and we kind of had an opportunity to do that because there were other pressures um, that other kind of larger project factors at play. So yeah, I wish I had I wish I had like a really kind of smoking gun silver bullet answer for you, but I think it's just trying to infuse this kind of thinking throughout the design project or design process, really pushing it at the beginning of projects and then finding all the opportunities you can as things get more developed.
So thank you so much, Brian. And before we turn to Paul Keys, who has his hand raised, I want to share one other thing that I've found through a little bit of looking at the presentations that came out of that summit. Um, so quickly, this Healthy Materials Lab,
Yeah.
uh, healthymaterialslab.org seems to be a terrific resource. They've got a section on affordable housing, and if you click into it, um, let's see, where was it? Yeah, this materials collection lists some pretty standard material options. It's a little pokey to want to load. Yeah, here we go. So here's some material options that look familiar. We've got tile, we've got some drywall, we've got doors, plywood. So yeah, linoleum. So there's some options there. They also have these cards that start at pre-design, um, to help. I guess the intent is to help, a design team start at the beginning, like Brian just said. So yeah, that's one resource. So
Yeah,
Paul,
I like, sorry to interrupt you. That's another amazing resource. John Sawyer Ruth is an amazing researcher and practitioner. And I think that also kind of adds into, Kathy, your question about, kind of getting this into projects. We found that clients are often very receptive to the conversation being focused around health and sort of quality of life and long-term durability, maybe much more receptive than they are to things like upfront carbon or embodied carbon. But much like upfront carbon and bio-based materials, often overlapping, so the same applies with a focus on healthy materials.
Paul Keys, you want to join in here?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking the question. And I want to echo Kathy's sentiments. Great presentation, pleasantly surprised. Thank you. So my comments are based on my experience working with both market rate developers and affordable developers. And I think, oftentimes because of our how much, as a group of folks in this space, we're always concerned about, the outcomes, right? And oftentimes, developers are on the other side of what we think is best. So I heard you mention regional sourcing, which I thought was very interesting and obviously could resonate. But so my question is, how do these materials potentially lower costs as a supplement to what's been used traditionally? And then secondly, what is the availability, and I know you can't say this across the board, of these products, and what is their scarcity? Because I think if costs are lower than what's been used traditionally, and if availability in the supply chain is better, the conversation with owners is a lot easier.
Totally agree, Paul. Thank you for the nice words and the kind of clear questions. I think those are maybe the two beyond kind of misconceptions and perceptions. That's kind of an easier thing to solve. I think cost and accessibility to the products are the two biggest ones. When it comes to cost, it's interesting. I think we've also found that if you introduce these materials early and you really bring in the team to talk them through and understand them, which of course takes time and everyone has to be open to it. We found that costs can be kind of managed. Maybe to use a simple example. So there's a company out of Maine called Timber HP that makes a whole bunch of wood based insulation using material supplied from the kind of dying paper mill industry up there. They have a big plant and they make some great insulations, loose fill, bat fill, and a board. And so I think if you early on said, hey, instead of using fiberglass insulation for stud walls, let's use Timber HP's bat. And you talk to them, they have 1 and 2 hour rated assemblies, they have STC data, they're eager to talk. We found that if it's openly bid, that cost is the same. I think there's a good overlap here with all the thinking around mass timber, right? Where that if you try to shoehorn it in late to a project and into a scenario where it doesn't really fit, the cost can be, of course, kind of astronomical. But if you design with these things in mind from the beginning and you engage the whole team in thinking them through, the cost can be kind of manageable. Now, in some of the products that are, as you mentioned, Susan, maybe a little less familiar, things like hemp lime or insulated straw panels, the costs right now aren't there yet. I don't think anyone would tell you that new frameworks could, make you a 12, say a 12 unit affordable housing building for the same price that a stick built building would be. That's crazy. That's where we want to get to, but right now the costs aren't there. So I think it's moving in that way, and to be honest, I think there's going to be a lot of incentive for these things for these materials from the regulatory side fairly soon. In Massachusetts, we've seen a big push towards FIAS, driven by both affordable housing credits in the LIHTC space, but also our new stretch energy code. We're starting to see the development of embodied carbon reporting requirements on the regulatory side, and I don't think we're far off from seeing either incentives for these materials or restrictions against really, kind of high emitting materials. Maybe that's a little kind of naive and utopian of me, but I think it's coming, and so. Yeah, hopefully that kind of addresses both. I think the supply side is also, yeah, sort of burgeoning. I think they're looking for a lot more investment and support, and we're starting to see that. But it's definitely for a lot of these projects or a lot of these products in the early stage.
So thank you so much, Brian, and Paul, for that perspective. I'm looking here in the comments. Kai, you've shared a free tool with us that you like to use. So thank you for sharing that. Could you give us some insight, Kai? Stephen Winter, you're working sort of in definitely Massachusetts, Connecticut, I'm aware, probably New York, I'm sure. Could you give us sort of a perspective of where Connecticut stands as we're the Connecticut multifamily network? I know Connecticut has lost ground, especially as compared to New York and Mass. Is there any?
In terms of embodied carbon, I'm aware there's been some policies at the state level proposed, mainly to do with infrastructure assessments with carbon, roadways and asphalt and that sort of thing, which are significant emitters. It's great that they sort of honed in on that, but I don't think there was much progress made with those policies. A little out of touch with what's going on right now, but the Build Green Connecticut has an advocacy group that I'm happy to connect folks with that would know more about what's happening right now. Yeah, I mean, as far as context, I think that Massachusetts right now is, it's a good example to look at what's happening as far as policy goes. There's some the language that they're using in the policy proposals around incentives for embodied carbon is intriguing and I think a great start. So they're looking at including language in the stretch code, mass saves, which is,
Yep.
the equivalent of our Energized CT and ratepayer program has some language going in there. So, I mean, there's other things going on. But yeah, I mean, getting some of those policies and ideas embedded in the Connecticut, thinking at policy level, I think is a great way to go.
Right. Any thoughts about, did Mass start at sort of that a bigger scale? Well, I don't want to say bigger scale, but like that you mentioned where Connecticut is now. When did Mass get to housing, or was housing always sort of co-equal in the concern for climate change solutions? Do you guys have a perspective on that?
Yeah,
In terms
what do you think, Brian? Yeah.
Sorry, could you just say the question again, Susan?
Did Massachusetts was housing always sort of equally important in Massachusetts along with other steps to mitigate climate change, or was it more of a trickle down? Eventually they got to the housing
I,
component.
I think the housing did lead, just because we build so damn much of it, much like you guys, there's so much pressure, especially in Metro Boston, to build housing that I think the state saw it as an opportunity to kind of let this to kind of lead the climate change work. So yeah, like I mentioned, I forget how long ago, but it's been a little while that any of the projects, the LIHTC funded projects through Massachusetts, through um, the state, got a big incentive to go to get FIA certified. So
Hmm.
that really has made a big impact. Um, and now I think it's spread from there to the wider stretch energy code that applies to kind of all large commercial construction. So yeah, I think they focused in on housing as a kind of test case.
Okay. All right. Well, so much for the idea that Connecticut might get to it eventually. Well, one can still hope. And to be fair to Connecticut, I'm comparing to our two neighbors, but if you compare nationwide, Connecticut is pretty advanced in terms of addressing these issues. So yeah, Paul, is your hand still raised from before, or do you have another thing? Just jump on in, anyone.
This
Nope,
is
sorry
Kathy
about
again.
that. I'll take it down. My fault.
Okay, all right.
This is Kathy again. So again, such a great conversation. I wish it could go on longer. I know you've also been looking at the Living Building Challenge, and we're in one of the demonstrations for that. I want to talk a little bit about that framework and how that complements or works with what you're talking about doing.
Yeah, of course. I think I'm no expert in the Living Building Challenge, but besides being a big admirer of it, I've seen a few of the buildings. The one at Hampshire College comes to mind. But I think it has a lot of overlap here, especially with their focus on kind of regional material sourcing, and kind of general sort of health and operational approach to buildings. I think compared to even something like FIAS, a Living Building Challenge is just such a complete rethinking of how buildings should operate. Mass Design has not done we haven't done a Living Building Challenge building yet, though I'd really love to. But I think hopefully that the efforts to kind of grow that standard will sort of dovetail quite nicely with the work of the BBMC. You said
Great.
you're working on working on one now, Kathy? That's
Yeah, so
really good.
there's an affordable housing cohort looking at the standard, and so it's unclear to us whether we'll end up being a Living Building Challenge project, but we're certainly looking at the standards. We're looking at the resources, and I'll have to say materials is one of the biggest challenges. We just don't have the infrastructure. We've all adapted some things, like we put bamboo in this house or did that or whatever, but haven't really looked at it comprehensively and the resources and things. I mean, this resource is just, I can't tell you how fantastic it seems. But when we're looking at this and we say materials, unlike if I'm working with energy, I know who to go to and who to ask the questions, and this network may be the answer to that. I'm just flummoxed.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and I think it's sort of, again, without really being an expert, and I'd love to get connected to your group. I know we know some folks at the Living Future Institute, and by we I mean Mass as a whole, not me personally. But yeah, I think it's tricky. If you take the approach of kind of what's our current means of or ways of constructing buildings, and can we kind of just sub in more regionally produced bio-based materials into those systems, or do we need to kind of more radically rethink how we put buildings together? I'm not sure which one's better or if there's more options and stuff, but yeah, it's definitely it's a tricky one. But I think when we talk about, you know, incentives and subsidies and case studies for kind of growing these the use of these materials, you know, something like this is kind of is exactly the right test case, you know, where there's some support for kind of digging into it and asking the questions and seeing what's out there, compared to, you know, a normal developer whose focus is, you know, building housing for people, which is totally fair.
Yeah. Hey, Rich Holt, I'm going to put you on the spot because of your experience in California. Richard Holt is an architect working here in Connecticut mostly, but he's from California and has worked there. Just curious if any of this rings a bell from what you saw in California or not at all, or what's the status of sustainability out there?
The energy code's changing every code cycle. I'm not up to speed on the latest. My experience is mostly in single family custom residential. Yeah, sorry.
So they're not necessarily any further along the spectrum then, as far from your perspective, or
Not to my knowledge, specifically with bio-based building materials.
okay, all right. Well, thanks for chiming in. Any other thoughts from anyone else? Well, I encourage everyone to look at what's online and available as a result of this terrific summit, because I just, you know, I jumped into so many sources of information just in the hour that I was or so that I was doing research. So I think there's a lot out there, and maybe we could certainly there's materials that we all could start to look at incorporating that are fairly, you know, mainstream. They're not you know, we don't have to jump into straw bale houses right away anyway. So yeah, I encourage everyone to take a further look, and I thank you all for joining us. And I think that will wrap it up for us unless we have anything else.
Just want to thank you all for the opportunity to meet with your group. This has been really great. Chatting, I dropped in the chat the link to our website where you can find the proceedings and the link to email James. I also dropped in my email if anyone would like to chat. I'm always here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Brian.
Thank you, everyone. This has been wonderful.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.